What's going on, guys? Welcome back to another exciting episode here on the channel. Today we're going to be talking about the Swimbait setups that I'm going to be using for this year, or at least for right now, until I eventually end up buying a new setup. But I've been getting some questions about what rods and reels that I use for the Swimbaits that I fish. So today we're going to kind of break down the 6 rod setups that I've got, what baits I throw on them, and the reason why. So let's get right into today's video. So I definitely don't have a lot of rods like some of my friends that I know. Like Chi has probably like 20 plus rods, but he's a guide, so he needs a lot of different setups. And so I only have 6 main ones that I fish with, and I do want to add some more to the lineup, but for right now, the 6 that I have, it works for me. I don't need to have a lot of rods just because when I go fishing with friends, they already have setups, and when I go out, I normally have 2, maybe 3 rods. I never bring the full 6 rods. I just don't feel like that's necessary. Each one serves a different purpose for different times of the year, depending on if I want to throw a soft bait, a hard bait, if I want to throw a bigger bait or a smaller bait. So we're gonna just get right into it. The very first setup is gonna be kind of my newest one, at least the rod, and that is This is the Deps Sidewinder, the Dom driver. It's an 8-foot extra heavy rod. This rod, I pretty much just basically use it for throwing the Deps 250. Hence why I also have the Deps and Daiwa collab, the Z200HS. And this is honestly like the best Deps 250 rod that I've fished in a while. It loads the bait perfectly, it fishes it great, and I like this rod because it's very parabolic. For my treble hook baits, I really like the parabolic action because when that fish eats the glide bait, and I've seen it 1,000 times when a fish eats that 250 right next to the boat, if you're using too stiff of a rod, you might actually end up pulling that bait out of the fish's mouth. So if you have a rod that's a little more parabolic, it's going to let that bite load up on the rod before you set the hook eventually. So this is a really sweet rod. Ben gave it to me as kind of like a Christmas present. I've been fishing it around with the 250. It throws it amazingly. So I absolutely love this setup. The Z200HS on here, it's the Deps limited one. So it's going to be a faster gear ratio reel. So it's an 8-to-1 gear ratio reel. Just because Okamura-san, the founder of Deps, when he fishes the 250, he likes to burn and stop the bait. So he designed this around having a faster gear ratio reel, and it works money for that slide swimmer. Now, I don't just throw the slide swimmer on this rod. I actually throw like the high power swim baits, the gliding gizzard shad, a bait that I like to really fish really fast. This setup throws it just perfectly fine. I think this rod is perfect for that like 3 to 6 ounce range on those glide baits. It throws it amazing. So beautiful, beautiful setup. I love fishing this setup. Granted, I don't fish the Deps 250 that much anymore, but when I do, I'm glad that I have a rod like this to fish it with. Okay, so the next rod that I have is the old school Lowdown Customs production model rod. Now, he makes some newer production model rods, which I actually have one, which I will show you guys here in a little bit. But this is one of the older models. This is the second one that I've owned, and I love this rod. I mean, the one that I had previously, that one had so much mojo. I mean, Phoenix is using it right now up in Minnesota, and I can't tell you the amount of fish we've caught on it. From big personal best largemouth to muskie, pike, we've caught calico bass, sand bass. We've caught so many fish on that rod, and it's pretty much the same thing as this, just without the gold accent on the rod. But it's the same exact rod. It's an 8-foot extra heavy rod. Comes with a pretty long grip here in the back, which I really like for a production rod. I got it for a steal like maybe a couple years ago, and I haven't fished this one as much, but this setup that I have paired up with the Z200, it's just kind of, you can throw anything and everything on this rod. I've fished, battle shads on this thing. I have fished glide baits on this thing. I fished pretty much everything you can think of on this rod, and it does it pretty much just the way that I'd want it to handle it, and it does it really well. So You can't obviously really find these older production model rods anymore, but if you can, honestly pick it up. It's fantastic rods. Ben from Lowdown, he makes crazy good rods, and he has for years now, and I'm really happy that I've got this rod here now. Okay, so the next setup that I have is kind of my soft bait setup. This is a Moam's. It's an 8'3" extra heavy rod. Now this one doesn't have that parabolic bend like those other two rods have. This one has a lot of backbone, and then it's got like a little bit of tip. It's got just a little bit of tip, but dude, it's just straight backbone. So this rod is perfect for those soft baits. Just that little bit of tip, I'm able to really bomb those soft baits out there, whether I'm fishing like a Baits with Magnum or the 9-inch Battle Shad. This thing throws those soft baits really, really well. And then once you have that backbone, what that does for you is when you're fishing a soft bait, especially like a Battle Shad where you really have to drive that hook home. It's not an exposed hook. You have to make sure that hook comes out and penetrates and hits the fish. The backbone on this rod does the job extremely well. So when you're looking for a soft bait rod, look for a rod that has a good amount of backbone, but it still has a little bit of tip. So one, you can fling out that bait. Two, you can kind of feel the bottom, and you can feel like, okay, that's rock, that's a tree, that's grass, and you can feel those types of different things, and then you can feel that bite. So you don't want an absolute broomstick, but if it's too parabolic, you might not be able to get that hook in those fish as hard as you might want to. The reel that I have on here is one of my favorites. This is the Shimano Calcutta Conquest, the 400. This is the 2015 model. So it's the slow gear ratio reel. I believe it's like a 5:1 gear ratio reel. It's around there. It's a slow reel. The new ones that they make, they actually bumped it up to 6:4 gear ratio reel. So it's a little bit faster. But I got this thing before they made the new ones, and I love this reel. It's so money. It holds a crap ton of line, which when I'm fishing soft baits during the season, there are some times when I fire my bait out in like 60 foot, and I actually get on the trolling motor, and I kind of even go shallower with the boat. So I'm dumping a lot of line, kind of like long lining in a way. And this reel holds in a stupid amount of 20-pound fluorocarbon. And so having all that line, I'm never worried about like, oh, if I make this cast, am I going to spool myself? Or I really want to drag my bait over this point, you know, can I do that? Or am I going to run out of line? You don't really have that issue with that 400 size reel. And it's a workhorse. And then the handle that I have on here is just DRT. It's the 110 size. And it feels fantastic, especially with those working class zero flat knobs on there. I absolutely love this setup. This past season when I was fishing this setup, it was honestly just an absolute dream fishing it. And I love this thing for those kind of bigger soft baits. Anywhere from that 4 to like 7 ounce soft bait goes really well on this setup. Now the next setup is pretty much my broomstick. This is for the massive large swim baits. This is a Moam. It's an 8'3". It's an extra heavy rod. Now I've had this thing for quite a while. I've fished a wide variety of different baits on this thing, but honestly, it's really made for those 7 to like 12 ounce baits. This thing throws it amazing. So I fished the Roman Made Mother, the Hinkle Trout. I fished the Ghost on this thing. I fished the 11-inch soft tool. I've even fished the Mother Chaser on this rod. Didn't do that great, but it threw it just fine. This thing is an absolute broomstick. There's just no bend. There's pretty much no bend in this rod. There's a little bit of tip, but this thing is so stiff, but it does the job really well. I've gotten tons of fish on this setup, and it's a dream setup. It's got that nice long handle that I have here in the back. So when I am chucking those way larger baits, I have leverage, and it doesn't tire you out as much as if you had like a shorter handle. Love this setup. So money. Now the reel that I have on here, it's my Abu Garcia Big Shooter. It's the JDM version. I've had this reel for, I don't know, maybe 5 years or so now, and I love these big shooters. They're just fantastic reels. Abu Garcia really knocked this reel out of the park. It's like a 300 size reel, and it fits amazing in your hands, especially since it's a low profile. It's got a good gear ratio to it. It's a 6:8 to 1 gear ratio. So I'm able to move like the Mother and the Hinkle at good speed, because with those baits, as large as they are, they move a lot of water. Great reel. It holds a perfect amount of 30-pound fluorocarbon for fishing even some of those soft baits like the soft tool. It's just a fantastic setup for throwing those large baits. Okay, the next setup is actually that newer Lowdown Custom Production Series rod. Now this one is kind of on the older side, because this one's an 8.6 extra heavy. Ben doesn't make 8.6s anymore. He stops at 8. So this one is kind of more on the rare side, but I love this rod. Before, I would fish like the K9 and the Deps 250 on this rod. One of the best glide bait rods I've ever used. It's more parabolic. It's got a great tip. It loads those baits really well when you're firing them out there. And then when you get that bite, it loads those bites super well. I absolutely love this rod. It's crazy how this is a production rod too, and it's just so money. But what's so cool is with this rod, it's not too parabolic. So it still has good backbone. So this past season, I was actually fishing the Battle Shad 7.5 on this setup, and I was getting those fish actually pretty hard with this setup. The reel that I have on here is a Megabass Lin 10CL. It's a $1,000 reel, but I picked it up local for actually a steal. I only got it for $250. So it's an okay reel. It's a 200 size reel. It's honestly money for the shallow water applications. So I fished like the rats on this thing. I fished the smaller Battle Shad and Citizens on this setup, and it's money. Now, if you guys have noticed, it's actually left-handed, and I've dealt with left-handed reels before, and you kind of get used to it after a while, but it's definitely kind of weird when you first do it, but I absolutely love it. I got it for a steal, and you kind of can't beat that reel for $250. So it's not really a swim bait reel, but it works for the smaller baits, and that's just a dream setup right there. Okay, and then last but not least is probably my favorite setup. This is the DRT, the Pulse 1C rod from DRT. It's a 7'9". It's an extra heavy rod, but I think it's just like a regular like extra heavy. I don't think you can really fish anything above 5 ounces on this rod, or else it's gonna be kind of pushing it. But this rod was pretty much basically designed around fishing the Clash 9, which if you guys follow the channel, I like fishing the Clash 9 a lot. So I decided just to get a rod that was dedicated to fishing the Clash 9. It fishes the Clash 9 so perfectly. It loads it. It's super parabolic, and it's just so money for that Clash 9. And then the reel that I have paired up on it is the Shimano Antares DC Monster Drive, the extra gear one, which is extra fast. I wanted that faster gear ratio reel to fish that K9, because when I fish my K9, I'm fishing it pretty fast. I want to pick up line really quickly so I can keep that bait right there in a spot and keep it moving. So I went with that, and then the handle that I have on here is again a DRT varial handle. It's 100 size. I got flat knobs again on there as well, and it's honestly such a dream setup to fish the K9 on this. I fished the Tiny Clash on this rod as well. It does fine with that Tiny Clash, but it was definitely designed to fish that Clash 9 the most. So super rare. You kind of can't really find the Pulse rods around, but if you can, pick one up if you're a huge fan of fishing the Clash 9. So those are the setups that I have. The setups here, you guys can hit up Lowdown Customs. I will leave a link down in the description below if you guys want to pick up a workshop label one, or if you guys want to get a custom one. I'll also leave Moam Sticks down in the description below. He doesn't make a lot of rods these days, but you can definitely hit him up and he might be able to make your rod. With the DRT rod, You have to pretty much live in Japan to get one nowadays. It kind of sucks. Sometimes DRT USA does get them in stock, but it's extremely rare. And then that Deps Sidewinder, I believe we might still have a few at the Hookup Tackle, so I'll leave a link down in the description below if you guys wanted to check those out. And pretty much the same thing with the reels. I mean, you can get those Deps 2020s. They don't make the Z200 anymore. You can get the newer Calcutta Conquest. I think they still make the Big Shooter. I'm not quite sure. They might have moved on from that model. The Megabass Lin, kind of super rare to find one of those, especially if you don't want to pay $1,000. And then the Antares DC Monster Drive, you can pretty much find those anywhere. Sometimes the Hookup Tackle does carry those, but you can go on Facebook or eBay to find one of those as well. And pretty much the line that I fish is 20 to 30 pound fluorocarbon, and that's basically what I fish. Sometimes I'll pick up braid if I'm fishing like the punker, but I don't fish the punker enough to have a dedicated, punker setup. So yeah, just 20 to 30 pound Sunline FC Sniper. It's what I use, and it works perfectly for pretty much all the baits that I fish on the regular. So that's going to be my setups, guys. If you guys have any other questions about the rods or setups or why I pick whatever to use for whatever, let me know with a comment down below. And hopefully we will see you guys back on the channel here pretty soon. So as always, go out there and chase your dreams.